So dairy industry lobbyists have persuaded 32 members of Congress to urge the FDA to forbid manufacturers of plant-based milk to use the term milk. It can only be called milk if it came from someone's mammary glands. We're seeing lots of content reinforcing this assertion from the dairy industry since this initiative began. Here are some examples from the National Milk Producers Federation, who are the voice of dairy farmers on Capitol Hill, aka lobbyists. Real milk comes from a cow. Anything else belongs on Santa's naughty list. So, if you're a human being, and humans do lactate, real lactation comes from a lactating bovine. Let's see, milk that doesn't come from a cow is an imposter. Well then, isn't cow's teat milk a human breast milk imposter? Fairlife, which is a brand of cow's milk that's filtered to decrease the lactose, which once you're weaned, you should lose the ability to digest, which is normal, and describes 75% of the global population. It is not an intolerance because lactose persistence is actually the abnormal state. Anyway, Fairlife is putting almond milk in quotes to suggest it's not milk, and they're showing it has less protein than cow's milk. You know what else has less protein than cow's milk? Human breast milk. Cow's milk has 33 milligrams per liter, and human breast milk has only 15. That's because humans don't need as much protein as bovines do. Bovines are massive and weigh over a ton each, with the daily drinking water and caloric needs of several human beings. The average person gets twice as much protein as they need every day, because in part we mistakenly believe we are baby cows. Even adult cows don't drink cow's milk. Hashtag believe in logic. These are both real milk. But once you switch the milker and the milky, there's a lot more to it now. It's now no longer just a mother nursing her own baby. It's now kleptoparasitism, or literally parasitism by theft. So yeah, it's real, just like plant milk is really white liquid produced by a plant. I think the lactation of a female should be clearly labeled as such. Like, if your coworker is a nursing mom who's pumping and needs to store her breast milk in the work fridge, that should be clearly labeled so you don't start accidentally drinking milk intended for a human and not for a cow. Wait a minute, shouldn't that work the other way around? Anyway, so yeah, I agree, milk should be clearly labeled and this should go both ways. Here are some ways that producers of real milk could label their product to help consumers be less confused. And that's the reason why they're saying they need to label the milk, because consumers are confused and they think that they're drinking mammary secretions when they're drinking plant milk. So let's see how we can clear this up. One suggested label: what kind of lactating mother animals did this milk come from? Why are we assuming they were cows? All mammals lactate for their young, and we could steal any of it for ourselves. So first of all, cow's milk should be labeled cow's milk. You see goat milk labeled goat milk, but cow's milk is just called milk because it's assumed to be cow's milk. And also, that should be cows with a plural possessive. Because how many different individual cows' lactation does each dairy product contain? Shouldn't it be labeled? The dairy industry doesn't seem to disclose this anywhere or even mention it because it's kind of creepy to think about, right? But it can be from hundreds or thousands of different individual mother cows, all producing milk to feed different individual calves in various stages of development. But it's all just mixed together. Each burger also contains pieces of hundreds or thousands of cows and bulls as well. That label might be kind of difficult. So moving on, since we know cows only lactate for their own young, how were the cows impregnated? Maybe the label should say, was it via forcible insemination? Probably. Another label: does this carton contain the milk of childless mother cows who were pregnant at the time of milking, or just very recently pregnant? That's something consumers might want to know, so they can figure out how many foreign female sex hormones they're consuming. Dairy cows are typically milked throughout their 9-month pregnancy until about 2 months before they give birth. Yet milk from cows in their 3rd trimester of pregnancy can contain up to 20 times more estrogen than milk from cows that were just recently pregnant. How about how many calves were removed from their mothers over the course of the mother's brief lifetimes so this milk could be removed from them along with their babies? The dairy site says the average number of lactations for each dairy cow is 3.6 per cow. That means the average cow gave birth to 3 to 4 babies that she never raised, some more, some less. How about, for another label, how many hours were the mother and her newborn calf allowed to stay together? Or how many hours after birth were they torn apart from each other? USDA data show that most are immediately separated. Many more are separated within 12 to 24 hours, and less than 10% of mothers and their newborn calves are given more than 24 hours together if they're being used for dairy. Given that dairy cows and their calves are separated from one another, does it make sense for so many dairy labels to show mother cows and calves together? Talk about confusing consumers. If we instead show the calves separated in their crates, like what really happens, consumers might be less confused about how dairy is actually produced. How about if the calves and mothers are in that tiny percentage that's not removed from each other within hours? How about listing what methods were used to restrict the mother and baby from nursing? Here's an example of just one of the techniques that are used for such a thing. How about what did the calf drink instead of her own mother's milk that you're drinking instead? In many cases, they're drinking blood plasma collected from their slaughtered mothers and, of course, hundreds of thousands of other slaughtered mothers all mixed together. How about what became of the mother's calves? Did they become veal or beef? 18% of US beef and veal is dairy beef. You cannot keep breeding mothers every year to lactate and keep their babies around. The herd population would nearly double after the first year, and after 10 years would be 3,000 cows if you started with 50 cows. How about what became of the mothers whose milk we're drinking? How about a label that says, the mothers whose milk you're about to consume were ground into hamburgers? That's how we thank them for giving us their milk. What percentage of the cows whose lactation is contained in this dairy product are already dead? It makes logical sense that a fraction of them were, given the fact that dairy cows have to be slaughtered as often as they're bred, for the reasons I just stated. How about, did she have mastitis? It's the most common disease in dairy cattle, which isn't surprising given that they're subject to mechanized milking for 10 out of 12 months of the year, including 7 months of her 9-month pregnancy. In fact, 1/3 of all dairy cows are estimated to have mastitis. Our next label suggestion could be the somatic cell count of the milk. They're the white blood cells that form pus. There is an average amount of somatic cells in US milk per spoonful and a certain amount that's allowed, so maybe it should specify that on the label. How about what percentage of the cows whose lactation is in this dairy product had bovine leukemia virus, or BLV? A USDA survey of milk tanks found that 83 to 100% of cows tested positive for BLV antibodies. So why do we care about this, even if we don't care about cows? Because of its strong link to human breast cancer. How about the environment? How much manure was produced by the cows that produced this dairy product, and where did it go? According to Modern Farmer, a lactating dairy cow can produce 150 pounds of manure every day. We're talking about far more manure than is usable or safe. Centers for Disease Control points out that large farms can produce more waste than some US cities. They then go on to name and describe the highly problematic disposal techniques that, quote, have direct impact on human health and welfare. How about for a label, how much water was used to produce this milk? The #1 dairy producing state in the country is drought-stricken California, home of the US's most rapidly depleted aquifer, according to NASA. In California, more water is used to feed and otherwise accommodate the cattle we breed, feed, water, and slaughter and kill than any other activity. Way more than almonds, for a much smaller yield. And Water Footprint Network says it takes nearly 55 gallons of water to produce a single cup of dairy milk. As you can see, even lower estimates still mean dairy milk requires far more water to produce than any other plant-based milk. Dairy cheese contains 10 times the dairy milk. Greek yogurt and butter require even more, requiring astronomically more water to produce, and all of these foods can be made from plants instead. And yes, they'll still be real. How about how many grams of methane was generated for this dairy product, and what was the global warming potential of that methane? Science News says emissions from a grown dairy cow can amount to about enough methane to have the same environmental impact as driving from New York to Los Angeles 3 times. How about how many dollars in taxpayer subsidies were used to produce this dairy product? The cash register price is labeled, but consumers might want to know how much additional money they've already paid along with their fellow taxpayers to make the high price of milk appear artificially lower, so we can use craploads of resources and make it appear that we're not. According to the attorney who wrote the book Meatonomics, animal agriculture is subsidized to the tune of $38 billion per year and fruits and vegetables only $17 million. That's why it seems more expensive to eat fresh fruits and vegetables. So just some examples of labels that real cow's milk should have. This dairy product contains cow's milk intended for baby cows. This dairy product contains such and such amount of somatic cells. Cows must be pregnant or recently pregnant in order to lactate. Used up dairy cows are ground into hamburgers. Male calves born to dairy farms are killed as babies for veal or as adolescents for beef. Exploiting a cow for her maternal secretions may give her mastitis. This dairy product contains milk from cows who have bovine leukemia virus. Dairy products could give you breast cancer. Cow's milk contains way more protein than human milk. Such and such number of calves were born and killed for the production of this dairy product. This dairy product contains milk from cows, some of whom are already dead and some of whose babies are already dead. Such and such gallons and grams of manure and methane were produced during the process of this milk's production. This milk required such and such gallons of water to produce. If not for your tax subsidies, this dairy product would actually cost such and such amount of dollars. Those are just some examples. So I have an idea. Vegans renamed vegan cheese Gary when some lady suggested that we shouldn't call it cheese because we don't really care what the F you call it, as long as it didn't come from a sentient being who wanted to nurse her own baby, and as long as it didn't waste massive amounts of resources in its production. I propose we call plant-based milk Mary. Almond Mary, soy Mary, coconut Mary, rice Mary, flax Mary, oat Mary. You get the gist. So please, join me in encouraging the proper labeling of milk. It's the right thing to do. Thanks for watching.